as well as Associate Dean for Graduate Professional Programs at Emmanuel College in Boston. We're right in the Fenway, so it's a very exciting time for us, given we have postseason, we have playoff fever right now on our campus. My research partner, Brianna.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I recognize some of the names here as well. I'm Brianna Parsons. I got involved with ACHE simply because I knew Bill. We have known each other since we were doing our doc work together back at Northeastern in the, I think it was somewhere in the mid 2000s. I don't quite remember. I am the Director of Curriculum and an Associate Professor of Educational Research at North Central University. Some of you may have known me in my prior role as the Director of Curriculum and Research at the University of New England. And I was the Secretary for ACHE in the Northeast chapter for a while as well. So very much love this organization and super happy to once again work with Bill on our presentations and some of our research that we've had going on. So Bill, do you want to kick us off? It's
yeah, absolutely.
Kind of for you and for your school. So
absolutely, yeah. I think that a lot of our idea sort of cultivation here between Brianna and me as we have these conversations where it's what are these have you noticed in your work? Well, I've actually noticed, and sort of from those germs of an idea, we've often figured out things that we want to sort of explore and look at. And obviously through pandemic, through isolation, through moving remote on our campuses, we came up with this idea of the adult learners transition to blended learning for this conference, and something that we're working on insofar as a small qualitative study for a little while. Since the spring, we've been sort of kicking around this idea and developing into this small study. And I have a feeling that it has some implications for you as well on your campuses, thereby making it significant. Brianna, the problem statement?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we started looking at this, I teach in a fully online university. So our students come knowing what to expect, that it's a very different model, that it's fully online. They are not going to be having any sort of residencies or anything along that line. However, we know that wasn't the case for all students. And when COVID-19 kind of hit and things started to shut down, what happened was that a lot of our liberal arts schools, and actually a lot of on-ground schools in general, did make that transition to either fully online learning or some form of hybrid blended learning. What we didn't know was how the adult learners were really understanding that experience of that transition, because it wasn't necessarily a nice transition, and it wasn't gentle, and a lot of folks were very unprepared, be it the student, be it the faculty, be it the administration. So we really wanted to understand how the adult learner at a private liberal arts college related that experience, related that transition. One of the things that we've talked a lot about lately, and we'll get into it a little bit more later, is the idea of educational trauma, that we're actually putting folks into situations and environments that make them really uncomfortable and more challenging, and compound that with everything else that we all had going on during COVID. How are we coping? How are we managing? So that's kind of what we were looking at here in this study.
So insofar as the purpose of the study, this descriptive study was to examine the experience of graduate adult learners at a private liberal arts college who've transitioned to blended learning. Now, I think in that transition is the area of intrigue or interest for me and for Brianna as well as researchers, insofar as they haven't signed up for this. This isn't what they expected, with some intentionality and saying, ooh, I want this format. They signed up for something very different insofar as an on-campus graduate experience. And through this transition, we're offering them something very different. So how do they in fact experience this transition over which they have very little control? So the setting is a private liberal arts college in the Boston area, a graduate school of education, which has licensure tracks in elementary education, English language learning, moderate special needs. And we spent May of 2021, querying the experiences of those who took coursework in the fall of 20 and the spring of 2021. So thinking back, these were, this was a pivotal time insofar as a graduate program that was still running entirely remote synchronous for those class sessions, as well as utilizing an online platform. While in the previous course year 1920, they were having exclusively classroom-based, live, if you will, graduate coursework. Brianna, the data collection?
Absolutely. So we had some success and some challenges with the data collection. As we have noted here, we had an online questionnaire that was distributed via email, hosted on Qualtrics and all of that fun stuff. What we didn't note on the slide was that we tried a focus group first, but it was really, really difficult to the point that it was unsuccessful to get folks in the same room at the same time. I've seen that a lot in research as of late as a dissertation chair. I still have several students that are working through data collection, and that seemed to be a problem with COVID. Folks just had so much on their plate that adding one more thing was really difficult. We did have a target population of 30 potential participants for the study. And even after everything, through the attempted and failed focus group to the online questionnaire, we got a total of 6 responses. Did use some purposive sampling. I think Bill mentioned a little bit on the last slide that they had to be an active student and that they were enrolled in the blended coursework. And it was again across those 3 programs. So one other part of data collection that is not included in the study, but that we're still working with, is that we did have end of course surveys that we're actually going through right now, and then can actually update this. It's an ongoing project still. So that'll be exciting. We have more data to kind of comb through and analyze. So anything else that I missed on that, Bill?
No, that's exactly right. It's, I don't know if you have this experience, but some campuses, in fact, embargo end of course surveys so that to create a little distance, especially with smaller sections, to ensure that the individuals aren't identifiable from their comments in the end of course surveys. So the embargo, having just finished, the end of course surveys were released to me.
Absolutely. All right, so I'm going to take a moment that's not related to the presentation because I can hear my daughter making a fuss in the background. So this is one of those working from home moments that the nanny called out sick. So if I have to step away, Bill's going to run the show. But I'll talk about data analysis before she kind of gets a little more fussy. So we were hoping for a fair bit of data. So we were really looking at using Braun and Clark's 2006 thematic analysis. I'm not sure if folks are familiar with it. I really like it. It's a very straightforward protocol. In that you are reading and rereading kind of the data and going through, working through your coding process. In this case, we used open coding, a couple rounds of open coding to work through our analysis. And then you're working through that kind of theme generation, category generation. It kind of overlaps with Saldana a little bit, but it's not mutually exclusive. And then analyzing what were the emergent themes, and then finally putting names to those themes, creating sub-themes if possible, and then composing our kind of final report. So that was the process that we looked at. Again, with six participants, 6 responses. It wasn't a ton of data. Still had some really nice emergent work that came out of it, and some really nice discussion at points and emergent ideas. So it was really exciting to see the level of data that we were able to get from such a small sample. And we'll talk about those in the next slide. And I'm just going to take a look in the chat because I saw a couple of notes come through. Yes, so the challenges that the learners are experiencing in remote learning, I think it's a really great learning opportunity for folks as faculty, as administrators, and as supporting staff to see how we can meet those needs and kind of find folks where they're at and help them forward. So that comment piggybacks right into the first theme that we found, which was I met the daughter in the background. I love it. Thank you so much. Yes. I can't tell you how many meetings she's attended with me. Sometimes she likes to be on camera, but I'm hoping to leave her off screen for now. But it certainly does take a village, which of course it takes a village to raise a child too. But that was kind of our first emergent theme, that teamwork was vital for proper change management. And on the subsequent slides, we'll go through each of these themes. So I'll just kind of run through them now. The next one was conflicting emotions. A lot of folks reported that they have some sense of grief or loss or something along that line, simply because they were not getting what they signed up for. And there was a process that actually, it took a while for folks to come around and say, okay, yes, I can work with this. And yes, I can learn. Again, I'll get into it more on the next slide. And then the human element. We're all human. We all give really bad presentations from time to time, or we attend or teach a terrible course, or something along that line, and recognizing that everybody was in their own space and dealing with extra internal and external challenges was really vital for the students. And kind of, I do have two sub themes, which again, we'll mention in the next few slides. So yeah, we can go to theme one. Let's kind of dig in there. Bill, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the comments that we had in response sort of say it all on this idea of taking a village in the teamwork as really a central component to being able to manage change. And this goes back to classic change theory. We can layer that on top of it as well as something that we know about how the fact that professors reach out made me realize we would be just as interactive, just in a different format when we have a academic tech team, which is really highly responsive, sort of same day, and really being proactive in finding solutions for our students. Conversely, when there's a lot of churn and transition, like with advisors changing, with people taking leaves, with other pieces going on, one student speaking to 3 advisors since the starting of a program, 2 during COVID, really feeling useless, in that it only goes so far as to say, oh, well, I'm learning just as you are as we go along, and we'll figure this out together. Well, it's not comforting. Bottom line is it's not comforting to take that sort of approach. They want some decisiveness. They want somebody with some answers at this point. And finally, I did not know that the college announced blended learning for graduate students. Now, I don't know if this is a problem at anybody else's campus, but having experienced several institutions which really don't do a good job with their graduate student versus their day or undergraduate student communications, and things that apply to the day students going out to the graduate students and vice versa, and a lot of confusion thereby taking place. This was not a unique, because I think it happens all over, but a challenge which we had to be far more proactive in letting our graduate students know that we are coming up together with solutions in mind for them. Anything else on this theme, Brianna?
No, I actually just lost the, did you stop sharing?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I think I pressed the wrong button here.
Okay.
Here we go. Better.
There it is. No, I think you covered everything. I think the idea here was that at this particular school, they did some things really, really well and some things not so well. So the process is, it's that idea of continuous growth and growth evolution, right? What types of modalities do you need to reach out to students? If they're not getting the emails, are they getting text messages? What's the email? The other ways that you can interface with them so that you don't have someone that's like, I had no idea this was a thing. Because we all know what happens. We all know that even if you do everything, you're still going to have that one student out there that's like, I never heard of this. But then how do you say, okay, well, let's get you caught up. And again, it's that kind of that idea that it does take a team, simply because whoever that person is that they finally connect with, they have to be able to say, okay, let me help. How can I help? Those type of things. That's really how you can re-engage and refocus learners when they're kind of outside of their element of comfort, or if they're not getting the messages for some reason. And yeah, we can go to the. All right, so this is probably my favorite theme. I did a lot with the Kubler-Ross theory in some other studies that I've done, and this idea. We all know we go through a cycle of grief, loss, separation when we lose a family member, we lose a pet, or something along that line. But the idea that you could actually see this happen within higher ed for something as quote unquote simple as changing a modality of learning was pretty powerful. And the first quote we came up with was, there was no option but to come to terms with it. I didn't have the energy to be upset about it. And man, that's a whole lot of resignation, isn't it? Like that's ugh. And if you think about everything else that was going on in someone's life, for them just to be like, okay, I guess this is what it is. It's the opportunity to say, okay, it may not feel so great, but what can we do to make it feel better? How can we improve this so you don't have that, this sucks, but I'll survive type of mentality. One of the other ones was anxious and overwhelmed and frustrated. Whether these were emotions that our participants were feeling just because of everything else that was going on in the world at that time, or whether this was the quote unquote straw that broke the camel's back, it's hard to say. But the idea that they were experiencing these emotions is real. It was their experience of it. And as faculty and administrators, it's okay, how can we move away from this to the idea that perhaps it's not ideal, but we can still make it work. We can still make this engaging. We can still make this fun. I think it was a couple months later that the whole idea of Zoom fatigue came out, that we've had so many meetings on Zoom that we've lost that, that interface. But we still have to keep pressing forward, because what's the alternative? Conversely, we had some folks that were relieved. They were absolutely thrilled. They're like, hey, I didn't have to travel, or I was trying to take care of a parent or something along that line, and this actually freed up my schedule. So there was, again, some differing data. There was a counter narrative, which was interesting. But on the whole, it was really interesting to see that kind of cycle that folks started into. It was another thing in their life that was a source of stress. But once they were able to get beyond that, it did turn into having a weight lifted off their shoulders. It did turn into something that allowed for flexibility, and kind of that respite from having to go to campus or something along, or every day, something along that line. So it was, again, just a really interesting process and cycle. I think that we've probably, even as faculty or administrators, also experienced. So Bill, anything on that one that you want to add?
Oh, absolutely. I think two things sort of resonate for me. One is, a boss a long time ago, who happened to be a psychologist as well. I remember him telling me that you can't tell people how they should feel. And we can't say you're entitled to feel this, but you're not entitled to feel that. They feel the way they feel. And taking this in context of COVID, especially with a lot of anxiety about health, about safety, we're hitting some of the Maslow, sort of the basic hierarchy of needs here. This disappointment is understandable. This relief is overwhelming when you're looking at not having to go into an urban setting, not having to commute into a campus, not having to be in a classroom with a bunch of people at the peak of this pandemic. Lots of relief, but also frustrating when it's a subpar classroom experience as remote synchronous goes, which has to be acknowledged as well as valued insofar as feedback. It's not fair simply to say, well, it was a quality experience. You didn't realize it. It is a matter of no, was highly reactive as opposed to proactive. And, this is a situation where the graduate school continues to try to make the coursework better. So the motions absolutely need to be acknowledged, need to be validated, and grief, loss, and finally acceptance is very real in what we saw here from the respondents.
And actually, Amy had noted in the chat that students are, they're people, and we all had conflicting emotions, and we still do have conflicting emotions as we're continuing kind of this journey. And that actually really ties nicely into theme 3, which is the human element. It's the recognition that we're all in this together. I think we've probably all seen the thing that we all may be weathering the storm, but we're all in different sized boats, right? Or somebody's on a desert island that's stranded. So the storm feels very, very differently to everybody, because they're acknowledging that there were faculty struggles. The fact that some of the coursework didn't come off online very well, or was very, very difficult to do. Or there were, just other issues for whether it was something that was being done online or whether it was the actual blended part of it. It was the idea that we're all in it together. We're all trying our best, and we're all making, we're all liable to make mistakes. And the kind of the premise behind that is it ties back into that theme one of it takes a team, and it takes people being authentic, their authentic selves, to say, maybe I don't know the answer right now, but I can help you. Or in the case of this student that had to orient themselves to the platform, the module, could we have done something different, that there was somebody there that was able to help them? What kind of extra external supports or internal supports are missing that really would have made a positive impact for this person? Some of this data is kind of hard to look at, as far as, as a self-reflection of it wasn't well structured. Like, oh, okay, well, thank you. There was a lot of effort made. However, not all of it was received well. And that's a learning process. And again, it kind of goes back to what Bill was saying about this being very reactive versus proactive. Is this the end of the pandemic? I think we all hope so. But if this has to happen again, what can we do differently? What can we do to improve this process so that we're not so reactive? I think we've learned a lot of lessons kind of across the board as far as what works and what doesn't. I know the K-12 environment's done the exact same thing. They put everything online and everyone's like, oh, we're getting an online education. And it's like, well, you're getting an education that happens to be online, but you're not necessarily getting an online education. So there's kind of that disparity there. And Amy just wrote that she was teaching a class where students want things that she can't give. And yeah, it's like, how do you engage through a screen? What's the idea of teaching through engagement? What are the other ways that you can support, that you can motivate, that you can be all of those things that you as an instructor or faculty member need to be? Again, there are some other folks that thought it was great. They were comfortable with the structure. They thought it helped them organize. And the idea is that really one size doesn't fit all. So essentially what happened when COVID occurred and everybody was kind of shuttled into this new modalities, we shoehorned everyone, right? We said, okay, regardless of what your learning style is, this is what we need to do to keep everybody safe. The idea of it's great. The practice of it's not so great, simply because no one learns, no two people learn in the same way. So you are setting some folks up for pretty good success and some folks probably to struggle. So going forward, how can you ensure that you're meeting the needs of all learners and meeting folks where they're at in the process? I'm actually going to pick on Shane because he mentioned it earlier that one of his children was struggling in an online school in high school. How many folks had a middle schooler or someone in elementary school or high school that did really, really well and someone else that didn't? Again, this is no different with adult learners. We just put everything else on adults, all of the other responsibilities, and then say, figure it out. And that's a big challenge. So Bill? Oh, I didn't know if Bill had anything on the theme 3. Sorry, Shane. Where is Bill? Oh, he's there. You're on mute.
And I'm just chatting away on mute.
Okay.
Here we go. There's a couple of things that resonate, I think for all of us, insofar as we know that professor that just went on to Zoom and lectured for hours at a time, and it simply didn't work. I question whether it actually works in the classroom. Sort of the stage, and this is what our learners want, especially with adult learners, when it comes to sort of the empty vessel sort of approach. It simply doesn't work for adult learners. So insofar as more acutely sort of leading one to re-examine practice, especially with remote synchronous, how are we structuring our activities and our assignments differently for the asynchronous environment with the remote synchronous experiences as well? How do we help both faculty and students sort of get over the hump of technology when they've heard through whatever modes that online learning is a waste of time or is subpar or is of lesser value, and now it's a necessity for them? So in all of that, obviously there's a learning curve. There's challenges for both faculty and for students. And back to Brianna's point, one size does not fit all. It's really a matter of, isn't it wonderful that we have all these different modalities and we can really figure out how we best learn as students and as adult learners. If anything, we're increasing access through this experience. So on to the findings and implications. And communication, consistency, and conversation were pivotal in sort of the upshot to what these participants reflected. You know, what information do students need to know, and how effectively are we communicating that? How are we sort of de-escalating the situation? Again, where it can be highly reactive and there's a lot of anxiety, how do we not exacerbate that anxiety with more uncertainty insofar as how we're going to seamlessly go over to a new learning format, learning, and make sure everyone is equipped to succeed. And finally, let's be reflective and let's do so without ego. What did we do well? What needs improvement? You know, we need open communication and not to take offense. And, you know, candidly, I am thankful for this Dean of Education who sort of threw open all the information and said, yeah, take a look at it. Would love to know what students thought of the experience. She approached this with no ego whatsoever, and she's looking forward to seeing this recording because she wants to know, what have we learned and how can we deliver a higher quality program? And for that, I'm thankful that there are folks who approach it in that way. Brianna?
Yeah, I think, and it's interesting now that I'm rereading this. You know, I put theme 3 as the human element, but the human element kind of overarches everything, doesn't it? I've had several students that just needed to talk about what was going on in their life, or talk about something that was not entirely related to their coursework, before they could get their mind wrapped around all of the changes that were happening academically for them and the struggles that they were having, especially during a time of COVID. And I think everybody felt this, that you were, you know, part teacher, part friend, part therapist. And it was that idea that, you know, you're not by yourself in what is a very isolating or an isolated time. And it's that relational idea of understanding all of those emotions. And if we're not giving the students what they need on all of those levels, how do we expect them to learn? How do we expect them to be kind of at their best, especially as adult learners when there's everything going else on in their life, whether it's, you know, family obligations or work or things like that. And then, you know, with the added pandemic on top of it, how do you get someone to relax? There was so much going. I don't know how many people. I think there's been report of that it was like 83% of U.S. adults were completely and totally stressed out as a result of COVID. How do you want to be your best authentic self when everything else around you is changing? And the only really way to even approach that is through that idea of authenticity and open communication and reflection. And it's sometimes that relate is what information students need to know is academic in nature. Sometimes it's simply that there's a person on the other end of it that's willing to listen and kind of walk them through. And I think they're really important lessons that we really can't forget, even as we transition back towards, you know, more of a traditional model, or in some cases, like for my university, still an online model. You know, folks are still experiencing these things. This is not over. And I think it has long-lasting ramifications as far as education is concerned. Let's see, I saw another comment. The missing course, our students are the content. Well, isn't that the truth? And again, if we're missing the whole idea that the student is the person that is, without the students, we don't have anything, right? So your students have to be the content. They have to be the focus. Yes, they're there to learn something, and perhaps especially for like licensure things, there are things that they absolutely need to know. But if they're not in a place that they can learn it, you won't be successful. So no, I love the fact that you're blowing up the chat. I really appreciate it. And we'll get this last slide wrapped up and then we can talk. So Yeah, so recommendations for practice. Communicate upcoming changes. This is reflexive. If you want your students to be engaged, let them know what's going on. Ask them for feedback, especially with adult learners. Why don't we do this? Say, hey, it's not just end of course surveys, but it's that kind of open place of communication of reaching out and saying, and letting them know that that's a possibility, that dialogue needs to happen. That goes hand in hand with acknowledging growing pains. The ability to say, hey, I really messed that up is really hard, especially when you still have that kind of student professor dichotomy. But as the professor saying, I messed up. Can you guys help me with this? Or something along that line, even to an adult, especially to an adult. That's a wonderful thing to do. And what other stakeholders do you need to engage to do this? This is not, I wrote earlier, it's not a sage on the stage, and it's not really even a guide on the side. This really needs to be a holistic process that involves everyone. One of the things that we've talked about, and I've mentioned it to Bill in other conversations, is a lot of us are working from home. I've already said that I had my kiddo in the background. She sat through Zoom meetings. I can't tell you how much of an icebreaker my 14-month-old is. She puts my students at ease. They get to laugh, especially if she's trying to press all the keys on the keyboard. And it makes them think about something other than, oh my gosh, I'm meeting with my professor and I don't have X, Y, and Z ready. They're like, oh, she has a screeching banshee in the background. I'll be okay. And it's the small things. It's all those little things that matter. But that acknowledgement of humanness is really important. As is celebrating the victories. One of my dissertation students, she lost her mom, her sister, and her aunt to COVID within 3 months. I can't imagine. We partied, we drank champagne during her dissertation defense because she needed it. And change is traumatic, especially when it's that type of change. So any small victory that you can celebrate, do it, because there's so much that we can get downtrodden about. Acknowledging growing pains is hard. Acknowledging when you did something wrong is hard, but celebrate all the good stuff, because in the end, it's all good stuff so long as we're making progress. So I'll let Bill kind of summarize and finish us up.
I think on top of this, and sort of an overarching piece on this, is the flexibility that we've all had to exercise, both as sort of, program leaders or administrators in some instances, as faculty, especially, and understanding people's situations. I will bring up a composition class that I taught for engineering majors last semester, and a lot of first generation students in it who are now home and learning remotely. And we had the blended environment with the remote synchronous sessions. A lot of people were insisting sort of on cameras off, and for a while I sort of felt like all cameras should be on and we all should be engaged. And wow, when I had everyone put on just as sort of a test, every camera on, I saw an Uber driver who was taking a break. I saw a woman in the back of her parents' restaurant at one of the stainless steel tables. I saw somebody who had probably about 4 or 5 kids in the background because she was daycare for the entire family. So, that kind of flexibility, yeah, I agree. Absolutely, Tricia. It's sort of one of these things that I figured was high-minded at the beginning of this, and sort of I was going to make sure everyone's engaged by making sure they're in front of their cameras. Well, no, you know what? It's not real life, and if they can listen and sort of tune in, and especially I'm doing the breakout groups, which I often do. Sort of those of you who know me know I love the I, you, and we sort of models. When it comes to that kind of classwork and group work, and for this as well, getting on to discussion very quickly, really is a matter of meeting people where they're at. And I think that has personally been my lesson learned and is applicable to this as well. So with all that being said, let's open it up. Brianna, what's your burning question for the group?
I think my burning question for the group is, everybody always wants to talk about, the hardest experience, but I want to know what the best experience people had in all of this is, and kind of what you learned from it for your own practice.
So I had some magic. I've had some magic moments, and one of them is I was teaching last fall. So this is an old story, but I was teaching a first year freshman experience course, which I try to teach. I don't usually teach undergrads at all. I usually only teach graduate students, but I do try to teach that course once a year. I'm not doing that this year. Don't judge me. But it helps me stay connected to what a first time learner, half of whom are going to be my adult learners later in life. And but the importance to showing up to class early and staying late, even in the virtual environment, was a really big win for me. And I started doing that from early on. And one of my students played guitar beautifully, and he started coming on early, and he would play the rest of our class onto the Zoom room with his guitar every day. And that was a magical moment.
I think it's fantastic, and I play cello, so I love music, and I think that music is kind of that language that everybody speaks. And you want to talk about something that allows people to be where they're at and in the moment. It is such a wonderful way for folks to kind of hit that relax and relate position, so that they can be open and engaged, and kind of some of those stresses of the day have a tendency to wash away. And I mean, what a wonderful opportunity for folks just to be in that space in that moment. And that is something you can accomplish through Zoom. I mean, it would be fantastic in a class. I would love to see it in a live classroom, but on Zoom, I'll take it. Absolutely. Why not? I think that's beautiful. And I just think it ties right into that human element too. So I think that there's so much to learn through that. I think it's one of those things, like, if you think about it, we let our kids do show and tell. We don't do that as adults, but we'd probably be better off if we did, because we all have something that you learn outside of that. And that's kind of what makes it all worthwhile too. So.
And I don't think that would have happened in a live classroom. I think that moment, and it certainly has never happened to me in a live classroom in the 20 years I've been teaching. So, there were some things that were unique to Zoom that, I met all of my, like, I love the comment about your daughter, Brianna. I had students with children in my classes. We all knew her. One of my students had her daughter every time we met. We all knew her name. Those are things that just wouldn't happen in a face-to-face environment. And there was a kind of security in the Zoom environment that we don't have face-to-face. So it's a different kind of security. It's both and.
I agree. And I think that, especially when the cameras are off, I think it inspires confidence in a lot of folks. When Bill was talking about that, it kind of struck a chord with me, because we were also requiring that students had cameras on, really for dissertation defenses. And then we realized that we actually, if you're thinking about things from kind of like that diversity, equity, and inclusion lens, you're actually doing a fairly big disservice by forcing people into showing that, because now you're looking at folks that may be embarrassed by where they live, or folks that may not be in a place that they would want to, represent or present themselves to other folks. And what a different dichotomy that is coming into an actual physical classroom, right? Because you leave all of that behind you when you do that. But when the classroom is your background, it's what a different challenge. And again, it's that idea of, if somebody's worked up about where they're at or embarrassed by where they're at physically, and they have to have a camera on, how do we expect them to learn when they're worried about what's going on in the background? Or what people are seeing or judging in the background. So there she is. I'll let someone else chime in.
What else? Any other comments? Any other insights?
I'll add, one of the biggest positives for us was how much grace our students had, particularly when we first shifted. And for our institution, we converted 1,000, 1,200 courses in 2 weeks to remote. It wasn't pretty. But our students understood that for the most part. And we continue to survey our students on a fairly regular basis. And that's what we all said in all 4 of our physical locations, was how much grace the students gave the faculty, because some faculty had no technology expertise or comfort at all. But we have seen in the last 19 months that grace is slowly but surely becoming less. 4 months ago, we had a very strong contingent wanting to be back on campus, and our institution is still not back on campus. We just opened very limited access to our campuses for the fall. And that changed in the last 3 months. We went from maybe 15% of our courses on campus down to about 5 when we actually opened spring quarter because of the Delta. And so we had students clamoring to be back on campus, and then suddenly those same students were clamoring to not be back on campus. So we've had to deal with that kind of fluctuation, but the students really have ridden this out with amazing strength, I think.
I think it's one
Absolutely.
of the, oh, yeah, okay, go ahead, Bill.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brianna.
I was just going to say, I love the concept of students giving grace. We always think of it as the other way around, right? We were always giving students grace or something along that line, especially, oh, I'm late on an assignment. Okay, well, you can have it in a day or something. But again, that's that idea of that kind of that human element of we're all figuring this one out. And it was a bumpy ride. I find it fascinating that they're having less and less as time, but not surprising that they're having less and less as time goes on. And it's interesting. I think one of the things that folks are learning, I have a student right now, she's a director of a clinical nursing program in Pennsylvania. And they had to put everything online. Now, how do you teach nursing online so that you can get licensure? Like, and do you want that nurse when you're in the hospital? And it was a big struggle, and students could not wait to get back in class. Right until they were like, I'm learning just as much online. And now they're having the struggle of actually getting folks back on campus. But they were able to coordinate all of the clinical things, everything online, so that they could see. And with all of the assistive technologies that they've got right now, it was a really good experience for faculty and students. But they haven't had that pushback of that grace. So it's fascinating. I'd be really curious as to see, you could probably have a really interesting conversation about that, about what it is that students are struggling with now that they thought perhaps they could let slide, 6 to 12 months ago. That would be interesting as well. So Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, all the above. Absolutely. I think that if anything, you can't teach X online has been challenged in every in every way. I've been having conversations where we have the evidence. So it seems like these end of course surveys really like a blended model. It seems like the faculty are all writing emails saying, boy, this is the bestest course I've ever run. So what are we going to do about this? It's are we going to insist they come back on campus and say, okay, folks, party's over. It's time to get back on campus, back into the classrooms, or we're going to let them vote with their feet, because they will find other programs if we're not offering them that kind of flexibility, or just options. Insofar as I need to do this lab-based class on campus, that makes perfect sense. But this class, which doesn't have the clinical components, I could be doing in a blended or an asynchronous format. Just simply having those options and being able to decide how I, as a student, would like to learn, is the bottom line. So you're seeing, you're still seeing in Chronicle and places like that, a lot of, online seems to be here to stay. And well, I think a lot of us have discovered that a while ago. I think it's really a matter of whether this is going to become mainstream in our brick and mortar campuses. And having blended schedules we always dreamed of, being able to let students say, okay, I'm going to take 3 of the campus-based classes and 2 of the blended or the online classes and have this mixed schedule. Certainly places which have really hours intensive internships and things like that is when people, our juniors and seniors are realizing that this is a necessity. Maybe it is time for it. Any other insights, any other comments?
I would just say to that point, Bill, I mean, sitting in the provost office now, one of the things that, and we are back face to face for the most part. We're not quite where we were before, but our faculty are demanding more tools. So we adopted online lab products last year that we paid for with CARES Act funding. And now the faculty want to retain those tools, and they're quite expensive. And so part of what we're having to figure out is how to make strategic investments in online learning tools. And we have great tools here. We were very lucky that we had lots of tools that we could go online with very quickly, but we didn't have this online lab software that we've adopted, just certain areas that were slower to adopt online and now want to stay, or at least have a blended lab experience and that kind of thing. So I mean, that's our big struggle right now is how do we, if folks want to stay in a hybrid mode, how do we support that in a way that doesn't break the bank?
Yeah, we're struggling with that too, Amy. And we have 2 campuses in, 2 of the areas that are most difficult to get around in, Los Angeles and Seattle.
Yeah.
And so both our faculty and our students are starting to think, not having to come to campus 3, 4, 5 times a week is a pretty good deal, actually. And so we have faculty now thinking about hybrid models who would never have considered it before the pandemic. But like you, we've purchased some tools to help in the process, and we have a lot of, our biggest programs are in counseling and psychology, and how do you handle the clinical elements of those programs? So those are some of the issues that we're struggling with.
We have a School of Social and Behavioral Sciences where I'm at, and we have marriage and family therapy and some other clinical things. And again, fully online school. So those have been things that they've been dealing with for a long time. So if there's any information that I can help with for that, please reach out and let me know, and I'll see what I can do if there's anything that would help with that for you guys. So. Anything else? I actually think that's probably an entirely different conversation. The idea of how do you, if we look at like traditional tuition models and tuition and housing, and then all of the online technologies that folks are demanding, I think there's so much more work to be done. But what a big change. And that's not something that, I mean, I think the level of that change has to be had, or that conversation has to be had at every level.
I think a really good session for our next conference. It was good to have this conversation about the transition to blended learning, but it will be an interesting conversation to have a year from now of the transition away from, what does post-pandemic higher ed look like at your institution? Because it's going to be different for each of us, but the struggle of moving back on campus, whatever that looks like, is proving to be more of a challenge than moving to remote learning was.
Absolutely. I think that's an area that a lot of folks should explore. And I think it's only going to be through that kind of collaboration that you're going to find best practices, right? And I think it's going to look very, very different for your small liberal arts colleges than it is for your major, urban universities. But if there's some elements that kind of are transferable through all of that, maybe there's an opportunity for everyone to learn. So I think it's a great next step. So. Yes, much harder to return and harder to return safely. And I think, I live in Maine. We've been lucky here. We haven't had a huge COVID incidence right here until really the last 2 or 3 months. And that's when it spiked here. And that was all Delta. Having said that, the county I live in, we've never had a mask mandate except for that original part, which is very different than other parts of the country. So some of the challenges that, folks have had elsewhere, we haven't had here. And then obviously we had some later ones. So I think that as things go forward, I don't know that the change is going to look the same for anyone. So I think there's just a ton of opportunity to continue that conversation. So yes, thank you.
So I think next chapter is exactly what you're proposing. What should we be retaining based on what we've learned, sort of lessons learned? What do we need to retain for, well, it's never sort of permanent state, because I think that we have to be dynamic in the way we're delivering. But I think there are aspects that won't be going away. And, those of our faculty who have been using, our online management system as like a document repository are now figuring out that it's far more dynamic. It's I work I think that some of you will see this in your own campuses. Back in March, when all this happened, 1/3 of our faculty had to figure out how to log into the online management system. They didn't know their passwords. They didn't know, they'd never been on. It was their first time. So that was sort of a journey from there. And, we've come a long way. So sure, we have the faculty who say, well, online doesn't work. I tried it 2 springs ago and it just didn't work for me. Well, was it really online, or was it some kind of reactive sort of Band-Aid patchwork that you survived in the last 7 weeks of the semester? So still spreading the gospel. Any other comments? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the other part of that is, as folks are saying that their students are demanding more of the online, demanding more of the hybrid. If you look at your supporting services, how do you migrate those online? What are your academic support centers? What are your counseling centers? What are all of those services that are generally traditionally on ground? And how do you integrate them into, whether it's a learning management system for students, so that they know where to go to get all of these supports and help? What do you offer for interactive places for students online in that online environment, if that's the direction that they've chosen to go? So that I think there's a lot more work to be done for the traditional campuses that have migrated online. And that are perhaps staying online or staying with that hybrid. And it perhaps means that you have to have both, right? And that presents a challenge in of itself too. So, so much to learn out of this. And yeah, I think that's the next step is trying to find those best practices. I think we learned a lot from this one of what folks can tolerate, what folks are interested in tolerating, and what folks is kind of outside that realm of being able to manage or cope with. But I think it's just the beginning of the conversation. So I look forward to the kind of the next part. So.
Anybody
Excellent.
want the final word?
Actually, just going to remind everyone to rate their sessions in Whova.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. It was great to see. I know I've met some of you before, so it was wonderful to see you again, or to meet you this time. And Bill, pleasure to work with you as always.
Absolutely. Love it.
So,
it's been a good time. Thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate your attendance today.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Take care.
Take care.